We're doing now Teferes. And as we've already established with Chesed and Gvura, we're going to do it in two ways. We all agree that when you have two words, right, Chesed, Shebe, Chesed, or in this case, Chesed, Shebe, Teferes, Gvura, Shebe, Teferes, Teferes, Shebe, Teferes, the more important word is the second one.
I thought that's only.
In either case, no. The difference is what's Begili and what's Behelim, but it's always the second that's the Iker. Because it's Chesed of Teferes. So you're talking about Teferes, a prat in Teferes. Now then, there's two methods to explaining this. The first is that the second word, which is the Iker, is a Pu'ula, is an act. And the first word is the Midah which motivates that act. And the second oifen is that they're both midas. That's how the Rebbe explains it in his Maimer, Sfartim. That he talks about hoid sheba hoid be'ikir, but Teferes is a midah, and how the midah is qualified by a more specific detail of a midah. And as I pointed out, and you just mentioned, the nafkemina is that if you say that the key, the second word is a pu'ula, that's qualified by a midah, you see the ikir, you see the ma'isa of Teferes. On the other hand, if you say that it's a midah which is qualified by another midah, then you see the tafel. The ikir is hidden. You're seeing only the tafel. When you talk about Teferes, you have to give a little bit of a hakdama, right? Teferes, literally Teferes means beauty, right? Teferes means beauty. To be sure, Teferes doesn't mean only beauty. Teferes means perfection and beauty, right? I heard a shir from Rabbi Yale many years ago, on a tape, which is where most people hear most shirim of Rabbi Yale, where he says you cannot have beauty unless you have variety. Many colors. A single color is not beautiful. A variety of colors are beautiful. And when you're talking about a variety of colors, the way they're arranged affects how beautiful they are. And the measure of exactness in that arrangement will contribute to the degree of yoifi. Yeah, so Teferes would be so beautiful that it cannot be more beautiful. In other words, perfect. That's how you would understand Midas Teferes. So then you're going to come along and say that that's impossible. You cannot have perfection. And the answer is going to be, that's the whole idea of Teferes. The Teferes is a yoifi. It's a beauty. It's a hiskalolus in an exact way. And the yoifi is so beautiful that it cannot be more beautiful because the source of the beauty is not coming from the same madrega that the colors are coming from. It's coming from a much, much higher level. In other words, when you put different things together, in as much as those things themselves are concerned, they can only achieve a perfection that is equal to the perfection of each individual part. And since individual color is not perfect, the arrangement of colors is not going to be perfect. But if you come from something which is much, much higher, then it's able to be perfect. Like I gave you the dugma from Rashi once. It's a moedendike dugma. That in Pashas Mishpatim it says that Moshe Rabbeinu was Magaya, the Jewish people. And it says, Vayikach, Moshe Rabbeinu took Chatzi Adam, half the blood. And he sprinkled it on the people. V'chatzi Adam zarak al mizbeach. And the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the mizbeach. Zokt Rashi, mi cholke, who divided the blood in half? And the answer that Rashi gives is, Bo malach v'cholke. A malach came and divided it in half. Now, I'm not sure exactly what's bothering Rashi and Pshuta Shel Mikra. In other words, this is not, I'm not trying to explain how the Rebbe would explain a pshat. But in Primus Hanyonim, what do you mean how you divide it in half? If you have a cup full of blood, you pour it into another cup, and then you look. And of course, the answer is it's not chatzi. It's kachatzois. It's kachatzi. And the Torah says, Vayikach Moshe Chatzi Hadam. It was Chatzi Hadam, not Chatzi Hadam plus 2 molecules more, or 2 molecules less. So Rashi asks the kasha, that's impossible. When one physical being is superimposing a measure, another physical being, if they're both physical, the degree of exactitude is always to the extent that each physical being can identify. And it's Medida Vagbala, it can always be more perfect. No, if it can always be more perfect, it's not half, it's about half. Be'erech half. But a malach is an inyan ruchni. In other words, he's not a part of the measure. And because he's not a part of the measure, you could measure it perfectly. And that's how you have to understand Teferes. Teferes is not a midah. There's no such emotion as Teferes. Teferes is the perfection of the midas of Chesed and Gevurah. I explained this to you once before in our shiurim of this year, Ba'ariches, that if you want to start talking about emotions, there's hundreds of different words that mean hundreds of different emotions in English. Why do we only speak about 3? And of course the answer is because we don't go into specific emotions. We're going into the metzias of the emotion, the teva of the emotion, the leaning of the emotions. Some emotions are leaning towards chesed, which is forgiving and inclusive and diluting and overlooking. And the others are emotions that are related towards gevura, which are exact and precise and judging and discriminating and discerning and separating. Yeah? So we have only 2 emotions. Now, if you come to Teferes, you should really be 2. There shouldn't be 3. And according to Chassidus, in Kabbalah, you only have 2 emotions. Midas HaTeferes in Klipa is not real Teferes. It's just because of that. It's a chitzenistic thing. It's a bluff. There's no Kav Emtsoy in Klipa. If Klipa had a Kav Emtsoy, it would be Kedusha. So the Kav Emtsoy in Klipa is Alefonim. Since in Kedusha there's 3, so in Klipa there's 3. But Midas HaTeferes is a Midah Mitis. What does that mean? Midas, emotions, are a metzias, are a thing. Anything which is a thing is not perfect. There's no such thing as a guf, as a metzias, that's being perfect. It has a degree of perfection, but anything which could be more perfect than it is already means by definition that it's not perfect as it is. Midas don't have the capacity for perfection. But the neshama does, because the neshama is not a metzias. The emotions, when you have a certain feeling, that feeling is only going to be precise to a certain degree. There's going to be elements of it which are not so perfect. Whatever they are. In chesed, you're going to be kind where you shouldn't be kind. In gvura, you're going to be judging where you shouldn't be judging. There's no such thing as perfect midas. But the neshama is perfect. Teferes is how midas are taken over by the neshama. In other words, Teferes is half chesed and half gvura. Why? Because Teferes doesn't exist as a midah. There's no emotion of Teferes. There's an emotion of chesed. There's an emotion of gevura. The neshama takes chesed and gevura and makes it perfect. And that's called the kava emtzai. That's what Teferes is. How do you explain it in psychological terms? How do you explain it in psychological terms? We talked about this at length in the previous classes. The way you explain it in psychological terms is as follows. Chesed means I see you and I react to you. In other words, midas HaChesed is I see your maimed matzav and I react to you based on me. How do I feel about what's going on with you? That's midas HaChesed. That if you're in a situation where you look needy, I give you. But Chesed is me reacting to you based on my feeling. What's Gvura? Gvura was the class I gave you on Thursday morning last. Gvura is I judge you. I use my emotions to feel out not just how I feel about you, but what's going on with you. That's why Midas HaGvura is deeper. It's deeper. Because I'm trying to know what's be'emes your maimed matzav. But if you don't deserve, I'm not going to give you. And if you do deserve, I'm going to give you much, much more. That's Midas HaGvura. But even Midas HaGvura is me feeling you. Midas HaChesed is completely me. I'm simply reacting how I feel about you. Midas HaGvura is me reacting to my emotional judging of your situation. What's Midas HaRachamim? Midas HaRachamim is Ba'asher Hu Sham. Midas HaRachamim means I feel what you feel. Not I feel about you or toward you. I feel what you're feeling. No, how can I feel what you're feeling? And the real answer to the question, in other words, the answer to the question on the highest level, even though practically it's not so pashut, is because at the level of the neshama, there's no separation between one person and another. The separation between one person and another person is the guf. Beside the neshama, they're echad. And when my neshama feels your neshama, I know your situation, how it is be'emes. Or to say it more precisely, how it is be'emes lamite, right? Chesed, emes, emes lamite. That's chesed, gevura, teferes. Chesed is me. Gevura is emes. But emes means, wie man sagt, an objective emes, a judging emes. Emes lamite means to feel what you feel. That's why, what are the emotions associated with teferes? What are the feelings associated with teferes? There's two emotions. Again, usually they bring one, but in Tanya Perek Tes he brings another, and I saw it once in a Maimon also in Tafresh Dunhei for the Rebbe Rashab, in the Kochsach and Dem, because I think it's made in the Gavart. The two emotions that come along with teferes are either Rachmanis or Simcha. What's Rachmanis? I look at your Maimon Dematzev and I pity you. I feel bad for you. But I'm not feeling bad for you because of how I feel about you. I'm not feeling bad for you because how I judge you. I'm feeling bad for you because I actually feel what you feel. Right? Where do you have the example of Basher Husham? by Yishmael. Yishmael is dying, right? And the Malachim tell the Eibush to let him die because he's dying from thirst. And first of all, Yishmael himself said, Ve'ed v'hu ha'ikar, Yishmael's descendants are going to kill Avraham's descendants, but some the very same way, by giving them herring and not giving them water, like the Gemara says, right? It's brought in Rashi and Chumash. So the Eibush says to the Malachim, Eisa shah, tzadik urasha. Don't tell me history, don't tell me past, don't tell me future. What's happening this second? Ba'asher hu sham, the Maimed Matzav Yishmael as he is right now. And the Maimed Matzav Yishmael as he is right now is me'ered rachmim. What's that rachmim? When you feel what Yishmael feels, it's a rachmanas on him. That's midas teferes. You understand? So midas teferes is the deepest emotion, like midas hayesod, right? The kaveh emtzoi, all the kaveh emtzoi are the emes. In other words, the whole idea of a center is the built-in mitzias imposed on the mitzias. And we had this discussion very recently. The dogma that I gave you always is a corner. There's no such thing as a corner. There's a wall and another wall. Corners are ideas. Corners are not physical things. Midah teferes is not a midah. It's an idea. That just like the idea of a corner exists because it takes two walls and puts them together. So you have the wall which is in tzafn and the wall which is in maidiv. And the seichel ha'adam puts them together. That's a pina. That's a corner. The same is true. You have midas ha'chesed, you have midas ha'gvura, and you have the emes or emes lamite of the neshama that finds the truth. How can you have perfect balance between chesed and gvura? The answer is mitzad ha'midas. It's impossible because the midas are mitzias. The mitzias is not perfect. Mitzad ha'neshama it's possible, and that's midas ha'teferes. You follow? So now you have to come up with a formula. What's the formula? What is an act of teferes? You understand? Here the kasha, the hardship is not understanding the emotion. How could you do a perfect action? How could you do a ma'is? In other words, we have two models. What we're doing in these classes is we're developing all 7 midas in each midah twice. The first time we're developing all 7 midas in each midah as it is an action. And the second way is how it's a midah itself, it's an emotion. So how could you come up with an illustration of I do an act that's called an action of teferes, an action of rachamim. And like I said, I wanted to finish my thought, I forgot to say it. What happens if you look into other ma'amid matzav and it's a good ma'amid matzav? So then you experience simcha. And again, what do Rachma and Simcha have in common? It's not an emotion, which is a bias, which is a judgment. It's an emotion that comes from feeling somebody else. So you have to now, the hardship, what we need to figure out is what would be a dugma of a pu'ula, of a maisa that somebody does, which is not coming from chesed. It's not coming from gevura. In other words, there's no netiyah, there's no leaning. It's a maisa mitis. It's a maisa of teferes, a maisa of rachamim, or a maisa of simcha. And of course, basically, the answer is when you do a maaseh and you get yourself out of the way completely, right? In other words, a maaseh which is rooted in bittul. When you do an act, and your kavanah in doing that act does it not involve you at all. Your kavanah in doing that act involves only the other person, doesn't involve you whatsoever. That's how you would explain a pu'ula of teferes. A pu'ula of teferes would usually be called an act of rachmanis, or faket, or an act of solidarity, an act of simcha. But what makes it an act of midas hateferes is when I am doing this maaseh and I'm not at all involved. My mitzias, my yeshes, my bias, my me, as I relate to you, is right away not emes. But if I can do a pu'ula vis-a-vis you, and I am not at all a part of that pu'ula, that would be a mashal for a pu'ula of midas hateferes. Correct? Which is realistic, you should know. I mean, you start talking about feelings. Feelings are a very subjective thing. But the idea that one person could do something for another person, and they're not at all thinking about themselves, it's far-fetched. It's not so poshut. That's not happening every day, but it happens. The simplest way, this could be illustrated if somebody else tells you to do it. Somebody else tells you to do it, it could be mitanemes. Well, when you give tzedakah to your shliach, you like the shliach, right? Now what happens? The shliach comes to you and says, do something for a third person. And the only reason you're doing it is because you've been told to do it. Last night's video in Shul that they showed of the Rebbe, afterward the video was over, there's a guy about Tshuva from Texas who started to really ask tough questions. Because the whole teichen of that sikha was the fact that there's no mention of God's name in a public school. And the Rebbe was talking so passionately about it. He says in the Senate they could mention God, in the Congress they could mention God, in the university they could mention God, but in public school for little children, you're not allowed to mention maybe his name. And he was so upset about the fact that when kids grow up without God, and the Rebbe says the only reason a person will be taught to be moral is if it's in his interest. Why should you be kind to the next guy? Because it's going to benefit you. So there's a word over here, and the Rebbe sagt stark gekocht in the word. The word is the Rebbe says no civilization will survive based on people deciding that goodness is good for them. It just doesn't work. Because it's not really good. The only way a civilization is going to survive if they have an idea of a ayin rei and a ezen shemas, that there's a higher power who says you have to do this. Doesn't matter what you think, doesn't matter what you feel, this is wrong, you're not allowed to do it. This is right, you have to do it. Now, of course, the Rebbe is speaking at a much lower level. Because the Rebbe is speaking, or maybe not on a level, he's speaking about Yira, right? The goy should know about the Eibishter. So when he doesn't steal, it's not only because he's afraid of going to jail, because he can have a bad name, but because the Eibishter says like Dignev. Very simple. And the Eibishter says like Tirtzach. But this is a dogma, that when you do a pa'ula, and in that pa'ula, there is just the person for whom the pa'ula is being performed, and not the pa'il. In other words, you are not a part of the reason you're doing this act. This act needs to get done. That's the only. It's l'cheira, one of the ways to explain a ma'aseh of rachamim, an act of teferes. An act of teferes means it has to be a true act. If it has to be a true act, it's not going to involve me, because if it involves me, there's no such thing as truth. If it involves me, we're talking about a ma'aseh of teferes, a ma'aseh of rachamim. Somebody needs you give. Finished.
If your giving involves you, no.
It doesn't involve your feelings. It involves your money. It involves your hand. But it doesn't involve your bias. It doesn't involve your likes and dislikes. It's simply something that has to happen. So what's right? So I'm giving you a dogma. We can debate this, but I'm giving you a dogma of a pu'ula of teferes, an act of teferes. I'm doing something. Why am I doing it? It's right. That's what I'm doing. It's right. There's no midah in me which is motivating the right, other than the fact. Again, the simplest way to say it: Hashem said, "Finished." The Rebbe gesagt. I always tell you the story. Said that an old chassid was dying next to Rabbi Simchas Teire by a kofis. He was over 80. And the Rebbe told him, I heard from my father, I didn't see it. The Rebbe told him to make a tumble sauce. So he said to the Rebbe, why? And the Rebbe said, because I told you to. So he made a tumble sauce. It was an old guy who was worried about his back, about his thighs, about his face nidvos. I told you to do it. That's a reason. How is it a reason? Because if you're going to mix in how I like and I don't like, how I feel, don't feel, you make cheshbonis. But when the Rebbe says, make a tumble sauce, the MS is, I need to make a tumble sauce. Kavanah is not an issue. So now you have Chesed Shebetferes, and Gevura Shebetferes, and Teferes Shebetferes, and Netzach Shebetferes. So if Teferes is an act, which is an altruistic act, right? So what's the Chesed Shebetferes? The Chesed Shebetferes means what motivates me to do this altruistic act is Ahava. And I guess you could argue that if Chesed is motivating the Teferes, how is the Teferes an emes act? You can say, how could that be? If the meaning of Teferes, that I'm doing something without a bias, in other words, I'm doing something that needs to get done, how could Chesed motivate an act of Teferes? Because the minute Chesed is motivating an act of Teferes, that's Teferes anymore. What's that Chesed? I like, I feel, I react to. I see a situation, this is how I feel about that situation, or b'meila I'm going to do an act of Teferes. So what's going to be the teretz? How could you have an emotion, which is a bias, that motivates an act which is correct? Right? So now I'm going to really go out on a limb. The chesed cannot be directly connected to the teferes. The chesed has to be connected to an interruption. In other words, like this. There is an emes. That emes comes to me from a mitzvah, from somebody told me to do emes. The chesed is not connected to what I'm doing. The chesed is connected to the one who's telling me to do it. So chesed shebetferes would be like this. There's a truth. The truth is, when you see a person who's hungry, you have to feed him. I is a bad guy. You know, I want to give you a real life example. I'll give you a real life example. And there are 100 or 1,000 cases like this. A while ago, a group of people gave out a video. I was very, very disturbed when they gave it out. Where a family found out in the last few years from a very, very old Zayde that there was a man walking on this earth who was the cause for that man to lose his whole family. Remember the video went around? During the Holocaust, people made decisions to save themselves. And 100 people went to their death. 10 people went to their death, yeah? Sometimes these two people both survived. And they would meet later in life. You know what that means? You're talking about nefashos. Yeah? And you know how many stories are like this? There are hundreds of such stories. So what are you supposed to do with such mices? In Lubavitch we have such mices. In the early 90s, they started giving out the KGB files. It's given finster. Why? Because there were people whose fathers were killed by the KGB because of a Masida of Pliny ben Pliny who was living bebenucho, behashket, vevetach, in Kfar Chabad. How are you supposed to relate to this guy? So for 50 years I didn't know. Now I find out. Why did he master my Zayda? Why is it Russia? No. Because if he wouldn't have sent my Zayda to jail, he would have gone to jail. So it's mamish, nefesh, tachas nefesh. There's a guy who told me a story. In other words, I'm hearing it secondhand, not firsthand. A Bocherul, Americana Bocherul, his father's from Russia. And every year, his father was a wonderful man. He used to send him to give people shalach manos. And he was a very friendly guy. He had a lot of friends. One of the people sent shalach manos to was very weird. Why was it weird? Because they had no relationship. They never talked. But every year, brought him shalach manos. He couldn't understand why his father sends him every year to be shalach manos to Pliny ben Pliny. Then one day, he's looking in the pile in the house, and it was his own father's KGB file that they sent him in 1990-91, or später. He's reading it, and he finds out that guy who his father is saying shalach manos to is the reason he went to jail. And his father knew it. And his father came out of jail 20 years after that guy. And every year he sent him shalach manos. And the other guy couldn't take it from him because he knew how guilty he was. But you know, when you're under those conditions, you can't judge. It's not right and wrong. I mean, it is right and wrong. It's an absolute right. It's a black and white right and wrong. But to hold a grudge for things that happened in the camps, you know, even the kapos, what the Gedalia saw, the kapos, most of them went to their death anyway. But some of those kapos survived and came to Eretz Yisrael. How are you supposed to relate to them? Yeah. So what does Midas HaEmes say? Let it go. Luz. That was not a normal world. Relatively speaking, this is a normal world. You can't carry that over to this. Leave it. Now, if you lost your family because some mamzer put your name instead of his name on a list, it's very difficult to leave it. The only way for you to leave it is not by having regesh, by simply saying, this is the right thing to do. Because I'm not going to bring my family back by holding that grudge. I met people who told me these stories, but I met a Yid in Long Beach, who told me a long story about his family. And he knew the person who had caused so much death to his relatives, and the kind of relationship that his father had with that man was complicated. Yes, so you want a dogma in real life for a mice of Teferes. Mice Teferes means I have so many reasons to hate this person. I have so many reasons to feel toward this person. Kach v'kach. This is the right thing to do. So what's such chesed Shebetferes? Chesed Teferes not means I'm doing the act of Teferes out of love. Because if I'm doing the act of Teferes out of love, it's not Teferes anymore. Chesed Shebetferes means I love the emes. I love the fact that I have to let go of whatever emotions I have and do this pu'ula. Right? In everyday life, we find hardships. Right? In everyday life, we find hardships. And the hardships that we have are very upsetting to us. They're very upsetting. And even if you can't blame it on a person, you can blame it on the Eibush. Thank God for God. You can always be angry at somebody. But usually you can find some human being, some parshoyin to be angry at. And they the mitzias, yeah. And then they come along and they whisper into you these two mean and heartless words, hashgacha pratis. Yeah. When someone comes along and says to you, listen, you're in a bad situation, you're angry, you're plenty, what about hashgacha pratis? Achtas Hashem. Or in the words of the Alter Rebbe, kalakayis kilu eved aved zara. Your anger at that person is misdirected. It's hashgacha pratis. Man, it's easy to say, huh? How easy is it to tell the next guy, to tell somebody else, what are you upset? He didn't do it. But what does it take out of the person who's in that test? It takes Poshet, it takes Amun, it takes Mesiras Nefesh, it takes Bittul. And of course, let's be psychological, because yeah, you want to live longer, let it go. You want to have a better life, laws. You can hold on to grudges, hold on to angers, it'll kill you, it'll eat you up alive. So the Ma'isa of Teferes is not an act with a Midah. The right thing to do is to forget about this. The right thing to do is never to tell my children that this is the reason they have no cousins. The right thing to do is never, ever, in any way, to carry what happened in that dark world into this world. Nobody is going to benefit from it, not even me. Let go. What's the Chesed Shebetferes? The Chesed Shebetferes is not I'm doing an act of truth because of love. Because if you're doing an act of truth because of love, it's not true anymore. I'm doing an act of truth because I love truth. I come to realize that the right thing to do is do the right thing. So the chesed is not on the pa'ula. The chesed is on the hachshara in me to do this pa'ula. You understand? I mean, I can give you many examples, but the Rebbe used to tell people to do things they didn't want to do. I'm not talking about shlichus. I'm talking about ben adam lachaveri, about marriage and about relationships. You love the Rebbe, you do the right thing. So the love is not connected directly to the right thing. The love is connected indirectly to the right thing. The Eibishter says how you're supposed to behave in many situations. Usually in life, what the Torah says you can afford to experience. Usually in life, what the Torah says you can afford to feel. Why? Because the Torah says makes sense. And sometimes the Torah says it may make sense, but it's so hard that the only way you could do it is if you don't let yourself feel. So what becomes the motivation to do what the Torah says when it's hard for you to do it and you're not allowed to feel? The feeling that you have to want to do what's right. So Chesed Shebetferes would mean a person who loves the emes and the freedom that the emes gives, and therefore you do a pull of emes, right? And then you can go through all 7 midas. It's not so complicated. Once you sort of establish a principle, you can go through all 7 midas. Chesed means I love the fact, let's put it this way, I love the fact that I don't have to walk around my whole life angry at you. I love the fact that I don't have to walk around my whole life blaming myself for your mama matzah. I love the fact that I don't have to walk around my whole life finish sentence any way you want. And therefore, I'm going to do kach v'kach. And what would midas ha'gvura, gvura shebetferes? Gvura shebetferes tiferet midah, right? I judge myself. I emotionally dissect myself. And I emotionally separate within myself the things that need to be separated within myself. What Midas HaGvura does, it separates so that when it comes to the other person, the act that I do is an act of emes. It's not an act that's reflecting me, it's an act that's reflecting the Maimon Demat. So according to this model, what would be Teferes Shebetferes? So maybe on the deepest levels, Teferes Shebetferes means a human being who's in a position to feel emes. Teferes Shebetferes, right? Teferes Shebetferes means what? The second word is the key word, right? That's how we're going. The second word is the key word. And the second word is an act. I'm doing an act that's true. I'm not doing an act that's biased. I'm not doing an act that's subjective. I'm doing an act that's true. Teferes Shebetferes means I am emotionally able to feel that truth. I don't have to separate myself from that truth, because that's the only way I'm able to do that truth, but I can feel the midas harachmanis, the midas haracham that's going to allow me to do the right act in this situation under these circumstances. You know, I have seen this in my life. The pale mamish. I can't be too specific because I don't want to talk about. I posh it, saw it, and people very close to me. I knew a person whose financial life, I'm not going to say his life, his financial life was ruined, and he never recovered by a certain people. And I knew the person whose life was ruined, and I knew the people who ruined his life. And when they got old, the ruiner was an alman. He lost his wife, he was alone. And he would come to the ruinee, to the person whose life he ruined, every single day and sit in his house. And he was so nice to him. And I was very close to these people, very close to these people. And it freaked me out. I once said to my father about this man, that this is what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Sof Perikid Beis. Lesnai ki Yosef emech. What did Yosef's brothers do to Yosef? What did Yosef's brothers do to Yosef? They tried to destroy him, right? I mean, what's worse, to kill a kid or to send him off into slavery? I mean, they're both pretty bad. And then Yaakov Avinu passes away, and the brothers are convinced that Yosef is going to now take revenge, and Yosef cries on the suspicion. He cries, trachten, he's such a pula. Yosef says, Rashi says, Neir echad, yichpa yidalef, Neir is one candle, is going to put out 11 candles. I mean, Yosef's forgiveness of his brothers was not a forgiveness. It never happened. That's an act of teferes. You only do that act either because you separate your emotions from the maaseh, like I'm describing, chesed Shebetfaaret and gvura Shebetfaaret. The chesed is not directly connected to the teferes. The chesed is connected to the desire for emes, and then the emes brings the pula. But teferes Shebetfaaret, you could touch teferes Shebetfaaret, that you can find in yourself the ability to feel the midas emes.
Meaning that there was no personal feelings in the first place?
Well, in the last place, that you graduate to a point where your emotions can actually experience what is the right thing to do now. It's a rachmanis. He could have killed me. He tried to kill me and he failed. That's yesterday. Now this is today. That's his choice. This is my choice. Now I'm sure you can explain Teferes or Teferes a little bit more complicated. You can say Teferes Teferes means that you have a feeling of the objectivity of Midas Emes, which brings to a Pa'ula. But if you're going to translate Teferes as we're translating it now, if Teferes is an act, so for sure in Chesed and Gevura there has to be a separation between the Midah and the Pa'ula. Now Netzach Shebet Teferes, right? What's Teferes? Teferes is an emes. And Netzach Shebet Teferes means Azoi. I don't want to do it. Why don't I want to do it? Because it's hard. Right? What's that Netzach Shebet Teferes? Netzach Shebet Teferes means I am fighting to do a Pa'ula that's emes. How often in your life do you get an opportunity to do a maaseh that the motivation to do that maaseh is, quote, it's the right thing to do. No interest in me at all. It's the right thing to do now. So Netzach Shebet Teferes means pasha, the regesh, which is going to motivate me to do the right thing. A, I don't want to do it. I'm lazy. Yeah. B, the people around me think I'm nuts for doing it, or the people around me are going to stop from doing it. Midas Netzach means I'm going to fight to see to it that what's right happens. And Midas Haoid is al derech zeh. What's Midas Haoid? Netzach is an aggressive emotion. It fights with an opposition. Midas Haoid is stubbornness. It is an emes. There's an emes. There's an emes. The truth. What's the truth? You have to fakuken. You have to let go of what was and do what right now is the Ratzon of the Eibishter. And you're doing it without any emotions. But there is an akshonis to make sure that you don't step away from that emes. There's a stubbornness necessary for you to not allow yourself to become biased towards the situation and to do the midas emes. And what would be Yesed Shebet Teferes? What would be Yesed Shebet Teferes? Yesed Shebet Teferes would mean that a person recognizes what the right thing to do is. And they draw strength from that itself, right? Netzach means I have to do something right and people are stopping me, or my Yetzer Hara is stopping me, I'm going to fight with him. Midas Haoid means there's a right thing to do. I'm prepared to do the right thing, but other people are stopping me, or I'm stopping myself, and I'm going to be stubborn. Midas Hayesod means I don't see any negative. I don't see any. There are enemies. There are obstacles, but I draw an energy, a regesh, an emotion from what is true to do what is true, because this is the right thing to do. In as much as it's right, I'm drawn to it. There's a feeling of connection to what is right, and the enemies fall away. So according to this model, what would be Malchus Shebet Teferes? So again, the same two ways I explained it to you in the first two midas. Number one, Malchus Shebet Teferes would mean the act of doing an act of Teferes. In other words, Malchus means Maise, so it's Maise Sheba Maise. Or it's Midas Harememus. Midas Harememus means in order for me to do this right thing, I have to emotionally distance myself. And you can understand that quite well. And emotionally distancing myself is not no emotion. Emotional, this stuff, I am emotionally raising myself up. A meaning to say, going back to the analogy of Yosef Mechav, Yosef is going to say, I'm going to be better than my brothers. My brothers reacted kach v'kach. And I should react kach v'kach. But I'm going to be higher than them. I'm going to be emotionally better than them. I'm going to be emotionally in the state of Yisrael. I'm not going to allow my hurt or my anger or my jealousy or my vengeance or my other whatever midas rais I happen to possess, netira, nekama, to stand in my way. I'm going to raise myself above those emotions and do a ma'aseh tefillah. So today we only did a half, right? Every share that I gave you, chesed we did 2 sets of 7, and gvur did.